Alright, so next pattern is the dark Montreal. Really traditional, popular pattern on the East Coast. Originally a salmon pattern that has pretty much just become a mainstay of trout fishing. It started out as a streamer, got turned into a small little wet fly with a duck quill wing, and then turned into a harrowing streamer. And that's about as much history as I got to give on it. I learned it from my grandfather. It was one of the first flies I learned to tie. He had his own little special version of it that I post on the website, which is more or less the same fly I'm going to tie today, but it blends white and brown bucktail on the wing. So, same old 6/0 tying thread. My scissors. Just start the thread again back of where we want the head to be. One of the things about tying bucktail streamers is that, bucktails have really dense butts to the hair, and so you can end up with a really bulky head if you don't kind of think ahead and try to keep that head area where you know you're going to be tying your hair in free and tie in as few materials as possible there. Otherwise you end up with this great big gaudy head that looks like you put a cone head on it. So we'll just wrap that to the back. There's no tail on this fly. For the body material, you can use dubbing, seal fur dubbing, traditional silk floss. You can go with standard old cheapy uni-floss. Silk floss looks really nice, and if you're tying flies to look pretty in your box and put on the website, use silk. If you're tying flies to get thrashed in the mud and toothy little brook trout, just use the uni-floss, in my opinion. So we're just going to get our thread started. And then for this fly, you can tie it with a thick rib, a thin rib, whatever looks good for you. The original pattern used a really fine oval tinsel. I don't like the look of the oval tinsel, so I just use a really fine, I believe that's a size 16 gold mylar tinsel.
Good job, Ken.
It's too dark for everybody, sorry guys. I'm used to tying in the basement, so I already got more light than normal. I tried tying in the living room one time, but my wife found hair stems underneath the couch, and that put an end to that practice. Just doesn't appreciate the art, I think.
Just use hardwood floors and then you don't have to worry about it.
You ever try cleaning deer hair butts off a hardwood floor? It's even worse. Better off with carpet, it'll hide itself. You gotta scrub your feet around.
You ever try getting the hook out of your wife's foot?
Yeah.
I'll laugh when that happened.
It happened 2 years ago.
Been there, done it.
So we're just going to take our thread here, and we're just going to build up. We're going to try to keep a nice flat body. We're not trying to build a taper or anything like that. You certainly can, but the traditional pattern was just a flat, straight body. We're going to wrap the tinsel up, back, and back again. 3 wraps. Make it nice and thick.
It's sort of your way of doing things. You wrap toward yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. As long as we know.
You know you have a rotary vise, so.
I know, but I just got this thing, and I'm used to tying on an old school Regal, so I'm getting used to the whole rotary thing. But I'm tying in front of people, so I got enough nerves going on. No need to mess around with your fancy Western ways now with this rotary stuff. This is Eastern style, Vince. After this, we're going to go play crib and watch Coronation Street.
I'm in as long as they're Scotch.
No, he's a rum drinker. We heard that.
Just so happens I come from Nova Scotia, so there happens to be a little bit of Scotch.
There you go.
Has to be
I kind of figured you wouldn't let me know.
Has to be Glen Breton though, bud. Gotta stick with the hometown boys, even if it is $90 a bottle for garbage. I mean, don't put this on YouTube. I won't be able to go home anymore. At least not north of the causeway. I'm from Nova Scotia, I'm even less fuzzy. You heard of Newfie Screech? My point is made.
So it's not quite as flat as it was going
No.
up on the first direction.
Because I'm trying to build it up a little bit, right? So I let it twist, and now I'm going to untwist it, wrap it flat back over. Try to speed this up for you folks before everybody falls asleep on me. Not quite as exciting as ram scrotum wool and that kind of stuff, but alright, so we're back up to where we started. And I'm just going to take a few wraps past where I started. Clip that off. So the next step is to bring our rib forward. I don't bother with a tag on these. Just bring it forward. Usually put 8 to 12 wraps on it, depending on the size of the fly and how much shine I want. Step that off. So the next step is we're going to put the throat on it. For the throat, we're going to use a little bit of red slopping. I got a feather here I've already started to pull apart.
What
What I like about using the slopping hackles is that, you know, they're really thick, really webby, lots of color, so they give you a nice, bulky, bright, heavy throat. I find when you strip barbs off a saddle hackle, they're just too sparse, too fine, and unless you got time to sit there and mess with your bodkin and straighten them all out and make them look fancy, why bother? Just use this, and I feel a lot less worse ripping apart a pack of $3 slopping hackles than I do tearing apart my $8 saddle hackles. But I've been accused of being cheap. Some people being Scottish.
Careful. We're frugal, not cheap.
That's right. Well thought out. So my throat, I'm going to run it back about a half the length of the body. Just use a pinch wrap. And then just use my fingers. I want it kind of almost up and down. Just like that. Trim off our butts. And then once again, we'll make sure we get a nice little taper. Now, if you want to cheat when you're tying bucktails, this is the part where you add a little bit of shoe goop and then tie in your bucktails, and that won't go anywhere. But we won't bother with that tonight because that requires some drying time. So we're just going to take a little bit of brown bucktail. We're going to reel off a pinch about that size. The one thing about bucktail is that the smaller the fly, the more bucktail you're going to need, which sounds strange. Normally the smaller the fly, the less material you need, but bucktail has a really severe taper to it. So the smaller your wing, the sparser that same clump of hair is going to get. So usually when I'm tying this fly on anything smaller than a 6 or an 8, I switch from bucktail and I use calf tail for the wing, because calf tail is a little more uniform to it, so you can get away. You don't have to add 10 pounds of bucktail to get the same look that a single pinch will give you on a fly like this. And bucktail or calftail will give you a fairly similar motion water as your bucktail will. It's a little more rigid. So we'll just even the tips out. Great way to meet friends in university when you live in dorm, especially at exam time. Really popular.
Studying wasn't high on your list?
Well, not at first. Not at first. Not when I realized how close I was to really good salmon fishing. My priorities got a little bit wrong. That's probably why I was there for 7 years. Well, that I did 2 degrees, but. So, with the bucktail, just like with the deer hair, we're going to use a lot of thread tension. That's going to help us keep the bulk down in our head. We're going to pull that down really, really tight through our pinch wrap. We're going to use our thumb and forefinger to hold those butts right on the top of the hook shank. We don't want it to spin. It'll spin a little bit, and that's okay, as long as we get most of it staying on top. And then we're going to take our butts, and we're going to trim them at an angle, just like that, so we can tie down. Now, for longevity's sake, we're going to put a little dab of head cement on those butts. I mean, you use flex cement too, works really well. And then we'll just wrap our thread through that really, really, really tight. You should hear your thread just zinging through your bobbin. So that we get a nice tight profile to our head instead of great big bulk, and that's going to help keep that deer hair in there nice and tight. Now for topping, I'm just using peacock herl, peacock sword. We talked about that on the website. Peacock sword looks a heck of a lot better. It's just difficult to get peacock sword, on every feather you're only going to get a couple that are going to be long enough to give you that. If you have it, use it, but again, streamers get smashed and bashed. I mean, it's an aggressive take when they take a streamer, so I try to keep my materials as rugged as possible, extend the life of the flies. We're not going to be sparse with our peacock herl. 4 or 5 swords will do the trick. I'm not going to worry too much about evening them up. Again, we're just going to hold those right on top of the head we just built. A couple real tight wraps. Snip them off. And if you're really not particular, there's the topping for your next dark Montreal too. If you don't mind the perfectly even and snip tips. So we'll just build up our bullet head, making sure we cover all our material. Right to the back.
Pulling hard down on that peacock herl, that doesn't cut it for you?
Not with that 6/0 thread, and not with that many together. You can cut it, and it will happen on occasion, but it hasn't happened enough to me. One of the things I do when I put my first little bit of head cement on before I whip finish is I make sure I give that eyelet a great big covering of glue and let it dry. Don't clear it out. The reason I do that, I didn't bring it with me tonight just because it takes too long to set, but when I'm all done I'm going to give this a coat of black head cement. If you coat that eye now with clear head cement, when you go with your bodkin to clear it, all that black head cement that's dried around the eye will clear right out. So if you take your bodkin and almost like an X-Acto knife, run it around the very tip of your head, you get that nice clean transition from brass hook to tying thread without having to sit there and fiddle and friggle to get that perfect looking head. Trick I learned quite by accident. But once I realized that's what was making me do that, I kept doing it. I always glue my heads on my streamers 3 times. Once as soon as I'm done tying everything, and then I whip finish through it. Then I'll put a second whip finish in. And I whip finish the entire length of the head. You don't have to. It's just something I do. So I'll give that a second coat of head cement, let that dry, then I'll put my black head cement on. So usually you're tying more than one, so you tie up a dozen, 2 dozen. I'll let them all dry and I'll head cement, put the black head cement on all of them at the same time.
So is the black head cement just for aesthetics?
Yeah, just for a touch of class.
Okay.
And that is the Dark Montreal hair wing.